Making a successful FPS on mobile.
Every game we released was #1.
Battlefield, Call of Duty. How do you translate that?
It didn't look like a mobile game when I got there.
It's all about hooks and loops to get all the money from the people.
Do we need to exaggerate things so you want to spend money?
Are you saying you were the one who spoiled it for the entire industry?
One of the things they try to do for most of their titles is taking all these assets from HD and putting them on mobile, and they're not performant.
While I'm going to be talking about that, I'm going to be crying a lot.
It's very hard to find a successful mobile FPS that is...
How to make a successful title on mobile, how to make it accessible.
It seemed like a crazy idea to put it out for free.
Hi everyone, my name is Ninel Anderson. I'm CEO of Devoted Studios and I'm your host at Devoted SpeakEasy. Today we have an amazing guest, Steve Abeyta. Hey Steve.
Hello, how are you?
I'm really excited about this conversation because for me, when I was thinking who gonna love this, and it's just like such a broad audience. First, how to make a successful title on mobile, how to make it accessible, how to make it look good. Second, how do we bring existing franchises that are big and massive on PC and consoles and all the platforms to mobile? Like what works, what doesn't work? And was like Genshin Impact being now an idol of crossplay. And, before that, I feel like we all were thinking, oh, PC and console separately and then mobile, whatever, right? Or mobile having its dominance, and now crossplay is a thing. I feel like every other company's strategy is crossplay. And the third thing would be making a successful FPS on mobile, which is, there's not a lot of them, but as we know for PC and console, it's the major market. But before we dive in, Steve, do you want to share a little bit about your experience and why you are the expert on that?
I've been in the industry for, I don't want to do the math, but it's 20 something years. And I started at Bungie working on Halo, the first Halo, and I was hired as an animator, and was able to ship that game as animation director and environment lead. And I went and did my own company after that. I don't know if you know this, but I started my own company to do kids educational software and put a prototype together for that, which was super fun. Not a lot of investment money in children's educational software at that time, and maybe not at this time either. And so I did that for a while, and I did work as a contract artist for a while as an animator. And then we'll fast forward to around 2008, I joined NG Moco, which was the first, it was the first studio to be funded by the iFund, which was Apple's fund to make games on their new platform called iPhone. And so...
What's that, iPhone?
Yeah, have you heard of it? I think it's going to take off. I joined when it was kind of easy to get into the top 10 back then. Every game we released was #1. I think like the first 10 games we released all made it to #1.
I mean, let's be honest, NG Moco was also really close to Cupertino, so you probably got featuring from Apple like that.
We for sure got featuring. There wasn't a lot of competition. The algorithm back then worked very similar to now. It wasn't revenue based, but as long as you're in the top 20, you can make it to the top 10 easy. And once you're in the top 10, it was kind of easy to stay there. And then we worked on a game called Eliminate, which was the first-person shooter on mobile. And not only that, it was the first freemium game. So everything before that, you would pay $3 to $5 to $10 for the app. And then this was the first time it's like, all right, we're going to put out for free and we're going to sell stuff in the game. And that, right now, it sounds so obvious. Like everyone is doing that, not just on mobile, even across PC and console.
Are you saying you were the one who spoiled it for the entire industry? We used to do games, and now it's all about product design and monetization design and hooks and loops to get all the money from the people. Not saying that it's evil, but are you saying you're involved in the first game that did that?
Yeah, absolutely, I was. And we were very scared to do that. Some of us were very scared. It seemed like a crazy idea to put it out for free, just because no one else had done it. But we released it and it did pretty well. And I think very soon after, Actually, I don't know if we were the first on any platform. It's quite possible Farmville was already out and was showing that it could be done. I'd have to go back and look at the timeline, but it was everything was starting to go into that kind of freemium live service type of idea. And at Engimoco, after Eliminate, I worked on some large brand projects like Transformers, and we worked on an RPG. And I've just kind of been in mobile ever since. I was working at Industrial Toys, where we brought Battlefield to mobile. And most recently, I was at Activision working on Call of Duty Warzone mobile. And so for the past 7 years, it's been looking at how do you take an existing brand, something super core, and bring it to the mobile audience. Because you know what? I didn't mention this. I'm an art director. And so
you know what? I actually didn't mention that either.
So being an art director, I really have to understand the audience that we're building a game for and what resonates with them. And there's just such a vastly different behavior, and it's converging now. But let's say 6 years ago, it's incredibly different behavior if a player is playing on console or PC versus mobile. And so I've just been doing these deep dives into what are the top selling games in mobile, what are the top grossing games on console, and looking at the different art styles. And really, I've been seeing the same thing for 8 years, where there's just a vastly different art style on mobile. Even though you'll have the same player playing on console and playing on mobile, it's just the way you interact with the games is different. We can get into that later, but it was just a discovery that I thought, well, is this just coincidence? But the more I look into it and I update it year over year, and it's the same thing. There's a palette, and there's brightness and contrast, and there's a certain just tone to art on games that do really well on mobile versus console.
Do you feel like there's a difference in how you approach, from the art direction perspective, a live service game or the game with in-app purchases versus the premium game, especially since you were among the first ones that created those?
So you hit the nail on the head. That's exactly what the difference is that if you have a single player campaign that you're playing it for, let's say 20 to 60 hours, when you look at those types of games that are top selling, you actually see a palette that's very similar to certain movies. The example I bring up all the time is Saving Private Ryan, which is a fantastic movie. Everyone who goes and sees that is blown away, and critics love it, and it wins all these awards. I challenge you to find anyone who was like, yeah, I watched Saving Private Ryan 3 times this week. It's just every time I'm on a plane, that's what I pick, Saving Private Ryan. Like there's just a somberness to the tone, but also to the palette, which matches the tone and mood of the movie, that it's not your go-to thing when you're just relaxing and you just want to, I just want to do this activity and kind of kick back. Marvel movies like Avengers get rewatched over and over and over. Avatar, which was the top grossing movie for a long time, same thing there. You can just sit and be watching the movie Avatar and be like, I feel like I'm on vacation. This is like the most beautiful environment I've ever seen. And when you dig into those top watched movies, you see that. And same with games. So
no, I fully get you when it comes to like Avatar and Marvel and Monument Valley, on the iPhone. But then, prepping for this episode, I was watching so many streams for Warzone and Battlefield, and they don't feel happy. You're like this, the constant sound of armor and bullets. I mean, it's still kind of sunk in a realistic world, but people play a lot of time in it.
Yeah, I think that's the key, right? Is a single player campaign. You go in and you play it for 40 hours and then you're done with it. For live service, we want people to play for thousands of hours over multiple years, right? So, and these are all theories, right? Like why people stick around on those brighter palettes and everything. But I think it's what you just said. Like, do you want to kind of have a depressed feeling? And would you want to go back to that on your mobile device 3-4 times a day? So the usage patterns of mobile is also it's on demand, right? You didn't plan it out when you're going to play it. You're just waiting for the bus or whatever, or waiting in line, and you have your choice on your phone of 200 things that you can interact with. And so that's what we want to be, is that app that brings you back because you had a good experience last time. And there's other reasons people, want to come back. You talked about those addicting hooks and everything that get put in. But at the end of the day, I think having that positive reason for coming back is what drives people more than the negative reason.
Well, let's dive deeper in that, right? We were talking about more positive stuff. Again, the franchises that you worked on, Call of Duty, Battlefield, don't look as positive on PC console. How do you translate that from, PC console version to mobile without having a giant user base of fans that are raging and protecting their IP to make sure that you can still deliver an experience for them, but also don't hurt their feelings?
Yeah, so that's the biggest challenge, and especially on Battlefield. When we talk to DICE, who created Battlefield and pretty much still owns the license, even though they're owned by EA, they're very protective of their brand and their core pillars at the time. So this is 5 years ago, let's say. At the time, their pillars are authenticity, and they didn't use the word simulation, but you could tell there's a lot about the game that really makes you want to feel the horrors of war. And a lot of their maps have an oppressive feel. So it's basically, they're not trying to sugarcoat the battle experience. It is terrible. So it is like Saving Private Ryan, which was a big influence on Battlefield 1. It's very clear when you play the game and you watch that movie side by side. There's a connection there. But they don't try to sugarcoat what war was. And they want people to get in there and feel scared, and these overcast clouds come in and sky darkens.
I mean, I'm getting scared even talking about it. Like, the more you're painting the picture, I'm like, okay, this episode is going to be probably even scarier than the one with Jesse Lee. By the way, there's a cool episode with Jesse Lee about Callisto Protocol, if you want to get more scared.
And I will say, DICE did a wonderful job at this. It is phenomenal. I don't know if you played Battlefield 1, but it is scary. Like, you feel like you really need to be ducking and going in foxholes and stuff. So that's awesome. But, like we said, our goal was to bring that over to mobile, and the mobile audience, that's kind of the opposite of what a live service mobile audience wants. They don't want that feeling. So that was the big challenge of how do we still not insult the people who are dedicated to the brand, and not insult the IP holders themselves. Like, what can we find in Battlefield that does translate? So that's what it came down to, is looking at Battlefield as a franchise. And what we discovered is, there are these dark and depressing and scary moments, but there's also a lot of optimistic moments, right? And that's moments of victory. That's moments when I like using this example of, you can have that overcast dark sky and everything, but at some point, if that sky opens up and the sun comes in and the rain, the God rays are shining through, that becomes an optimistic moment. And as long as you are giving the player those moments on every session, it'll make them want to come back. So it really is, Battlefield, we can't make it rainbows and unicorns and, everything's fun and sugar-coated. There does have to be that journey, that up and down journey of positive and negative and scary and fun. But it really comes down to just that balance of light and dark and positive and negative, that we just have to lean in more to the optimistic side of things.
So you would say the Battlefield Mobile is more bright, a bigger variety when it comes to color palette, and to my, when I compare the two, Battlefield Mobile obviously have some stylization to it. I wonder if it's, just driven by the mobile itself, or, the platform, or just the optimization also. You can't really get that performance and that photorealistic look on mobile devices. Oh, I have so many questions. It's a very loaded one. Sorry.
Yeah. So, there are the technical challenges to it. Those are starting to go away more and more as mobile devices catch up with console devices. Back when we were working on Battlefield, Well, we were also doing full destruction, which was a huge challenge. So, but actually, what would be good is if I share a couple of examples. This is iOS top grossing in 2024 in games, and this is just to see what the mobile audience is looking at. And this looks almost identical to 6 or 7 years ago in terms of, you talked about, is it brighter? Is it more saturated when we were talking about Battlefield Mobile? It is. So we just talked about a bunch of games that weren't first-person shooters, right? And so that's the next question. Yeah, but what about first-person shooters on mobile? So if you look at top grossing mobile FPS, it's similar, right? It's still bright, blue skies, very green greens, not a lot of dark spaces. And you may think, well, yeah, this does look a little bit more desaturated than just the iOS top grossing. But if I add in what you see on console, you'll see that console, it can get very desaturated or color graded and very dark at times.
We also need to consider that when you're playing on PC or console, you can play in a dark room, but when you're playing on mobile, if your screen is dark and it's a bright day and you're outside, you can't see anything. So you have to kind of consider that as a part of your strategy for developing a product. That's
absolutely right. Yeah, legibility is one of the first things you have to think about on mobile. Everything crammed down and how much contrast and exaggeration you have to have. Even that is catching up with Retina display and everything. If you have good eyes, which, I have reader glasses, so I don't have great eyes, but younger kids, if they have good eyes and they can get very close to the screen, they can actually see it a way more detail than you could 8 or 10 years ago. And that's one thing. It's very hard to find a screenshot for a successful mobile FPS that is very dark. It just really doesn't really exist, because when you add those in, you just notice people don't play, and so then you just remove it from we talked about this top grossing movies, right? And so these are examples of what the daytime light, and then this example what a nighttime or darker scene looks like. You can see Titanic. Their dark is not dark at all. same with The Force Awakens. And it's kind of like that. If you watch sitcoms, and you see two people talking in a room and they shut off the lights, you'll notice like they turn on all these other lights so that you can still see the characters really, really well. So it's a fake night lighting, which is what these do. And if I go and show Saving Private Ryan, you'll notice it's intentionally desaturated, just again, to give you that sense of dread. So there's something in us that desaturated just doesn't make us feel that good, and bright poppy colors just makes us feel good. I have some theories for why that is, based on historically how we survived as a species. I think when you have bright verdant hills and you have bright fruit and all that, it's just an easier place for you to survive. So I think that's still ingrained in us as humans.
Right. Well, that's why I have a pink couch in my office. Every time people come in and they're like, "You run a company," I'm like, "Yep." And I also have a pink couch. It makes me feel better. Like I don't want any desaturated stuff here. Awesome. What else do you have there?
Again, I want to make sure that I'm looking at everything and I'm not biased. So I looked up the top streaming of all time, and this surprised me because on Netflix, the most watched film on Netflix is called Bird Box. I haven't seen it.
I've seen a video of it and I'm like, that is pretty terrifying. It's like,
right.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like a happy experience, right? So, again, this may be just a lot of people watching it once, or who knows, maybe they're coming back to it. I want to look into this more. But I did look on Disney Plus, and the top most streamed movie of all time is Moana. And it's, when you talk about, this is what I think about too when we're working on mobile games. Do you want to be in that place? Like, do you want to just spend your time in that environment, just sitting around? But I think that's why people are watching Moana over and over, because it just feels like you're on vacation. You want to hang out there.
Especially those kids. They work so hard and really need to feel like they're on vacation. Sorry. Day of sarcasm today. So Battlefield, Call of Duty are inherently too big franchises, right? Both on the FPS side. When working on those two, can you share a little bit with me, what do you feel like the big similarities for them, and what are the big differences that you have to approach differently when thinking about the crossplay versions of them?
Well, so there was no crossplay for Battlefield, fortunately. I think fortunately for us, because it was a lot of there were a lot of challenges for doing crossplay for Call of Duty, but I'll start with the differences. The differences is Call of Duty even back then was more open to doing kind of whimsical stuff. If you played Call of Duty Mobile, or if your watchers have played Call of Duty Mobile, you can dress up in a bunny suit or like a clown or whatever, right? The characters are very, very wacky. Battlefield as a franchise wasn't really open to that when we first started working with them. And so it was an even larger challenge, again, to be like, this is the corest of the core that's out there, and mobile is not. And so how do you bring all these mobile players to this brand? And it's something that is more serious than anything that they've encountered on their mobile device. That was the big challenge there. For Call of Duty, the cross-platform play was really challenging from a technical standpoint, because it's using the same engine as the console version, right? When you're making them for mobile, you're making mobile-specific shaders because the hardware just does things different. Like there's certain things that don't work on mobile, like a full-screen alpha is really expensive. When you play mobile games, first-person shooter or not, you don't see a lot of like smoke grenades and stuff because you have all these full-screen layers of alpha. And so just how you handle every single material and texture is different. And many times with mobile, it's what console was using 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And you're doing all these little tricks to make it, to make it look good. And it can look really good.
You're selling it so well. It's just like PC and console, just like 15 years ago.
Well, so 15 years ago in console, it was still really clever and awesome, right? It's just the solutions that are being used on console now, the hardware is so fast compared to what it was 10 years ago. And so you're just allowed to do a lot more stuff, and it doesn't, I shouldn't say it doesn't have to be as clever, but you don't have to figure as many workarounds in order to make this thing look realistic. So that was the biggest thing, was taking all these assets from HD and putting them on mobile, and they're not performant. And so, well, what do? Do you just like turn off some visual features here and there?
What are the things that you feel for Warzone were successful when doing a mobile version, and what you won't do if looking back again? Like, there was a lot of time that was wasted, and the outcome wasn't giving as much as you put into it.
Well, so for me, that biggest challenge that I talked about, of just taking it's cross-platform, it's using the same engine across all platforms, that just created a giant headache with trying to get it performant on basically Android devices. There's thousands, right? And so trying to get something that's not built from the ground up for mobile and trying to get it performant on all of those devices is very, very challenging. Usually when we're making games, we just split it up into certain tiers of devices. And usually when you're building it from the ground up, if it's performant on this tier, it's performant on all of those devices within that tier. And that wasn't always the case with this. Again, because it wasn't built for mobile from the ground up. So it would be performant on 80% of the devices within that tier. And then 20% of them would have some sort of issue with some sort of rendering feature or technology that specific device had problems with. And it's just really hard to keep up with that many devices.
Right. Do you feel like rendering part is the hardest when it comes to translating it to mobile, if you're having like a C++ engine?
I have no idea. I'm an artist, remember?
Yeah, I do. But as you also, as an artist and an art director, you have to think about lighting and tech art, which is a part of the domain of an art director. That's the biggest part, actually. There's asset optimization, rendering, animation optimization, right? Actually, bitted out a remastering project recently, so I could talk about a lot about down-resing and up-resing content and making it performant across all the platforms. While I'm going to be talking about that, I'm going to be crying a lot. So
That's a good point. Yeah, if you're asking, asset optimization or rendering on that project, they were completely tied together, right? Because the original assets were created for a platform that we're not developing on, with using rendering technology that isn't optimized for mobile. So that was the challenge: is how do you bring that asset over? And yes, you brought up some solutions that we talked about. Do you automate everything so that you're changing all of the assets, not just down-resing them, but are you changing the actual shaders that you're using, right, from console to mobile? Or are you making the rendering features on mobile just more and more performant? So there's a lot of options, but it's no matter what, the solution is a terrible amount of work. It's a lot of work to get that done.
tears.
Yeah, and it could be done easier on smaller maps, but it's the game mode is tons of players on a giant map, right? And so you're just adding that complexity as well.
What was easy about that project? Was there anything on the list that you're like coming in from Battlefield, like, I know how to do this, and I know, because when you joined the project, it was already going, right? It was Project Aurora, right? How far in the development were they?
It didn't look like a mobile game when I got there, in my opinion. It was dark and desaturated. There were certain rooms that were very, very dark, almost like it looked like no light was coming in. You asked what's the easiest part of it. I think that the team was so big. There were so many resources. So I just come from industrial toys, and we had a very small team compared to most teams that make FPS on mobile. And if we wanted to add a feature, something simple, like, I don't know, we want to add animation support during a reload or something like that. We don't have that many people to do it, right? So it gets put on the schedule, and it's going to be a ways back, and then someone has to kind of prioritize this or that. On Warzone Mobile, the team was so big that you would just see these features being added every week. Like an incredible amount of stuff being added every week. The team size was probably a factor of 5 larger than industrial toys.
Wow. I wonder how did you manage all of that? That sounds like an incredible amount of work just to keep up with everything that is going on simultaneously. But instead, I actually want to dive deeper in probably the two main things there would be the biggest concern from bringing anything to a different platform, which is UI and controls, and making sure that when you play, the visual feedback, right? How did you guys as a team make UI work so that we as people who watch this can learn of like what works when making a UI for an FPS game work?
Yeah, I mean, we weren't first to market, right? So it's not like it had to be invented. Call of Duty Mobile was out, Knives Out, PUBG Mobile. There's plenty out there to prove the dual stick interface. When I started Industrial Toys, EA had actually wanted to do a very casual version of a shooter, and that's what our studio was working on. It wasn't dual stick. And then as we were working on it, Fortnite came out with dual stick and became very popular, and kind of proved that, okay, people are ready for dual stick. And it's just funny being in mobile for so long. You actually see the audience itself change, because the dexterity it takes to do that for someone my age it's very difficult. We have playtests, right? And I go on, I play in the playtest every day. I'm playing this game and I'm running around. And then my son, who just didn't play our game at all, he's like, "Oh, it's playable. Let me play it." He jumps in and starts destroying everybody, like all my coworkers. It's his first time playing, and they're like, "Steve, man, you're killing it today." I was like, "Well, that was my son." And so it's just a different generation, right? They grew up with this type of manual dexterity, and so in 10 years, there's probably going to be a different, maybe even less than 10 years, there's probably going to be a different interface that these kids have grown up on that further alienates my generation, but spawns a whole new genre on mobile.
You're not alone. Sometimes I watch kids play and I'm like, I don't even have the reaction like that. I'm like, I can't even keep up watching it, not even thinking about playing that. Well, with Battlefield, you were pretty much from the beginning of the project, right? And so a lot of decisions you got to make with the team. Looking back, what are the decisions you're the most proud of?
We talked about how certain parts of Battlefield could be very dark and gloomy. And what I'm proudest of is the way we handled the maps, because I think they still feel very much like Battlefield, but they don't feel depressing. And I think in most cases, they did feel like places you'd want to hang out in and you'd want to return to. That was quite a challenge from not just an artistic standpoint, but from a technical standpoint, to get some of the skies and the atmospherics and certain things like that to look the way that we wanted to, that reference Battlefield, but was performant on mobile. So I can't take credit for the execution of this. We had an environment team that was pretty spectacular, a technical art team that was amazing. So I'm happy when I look at the environment screenshots. It looks like HD Battlefield in a lot of cases.
It does. It's insane. How were you able to achieve that?
One of the things they try to do for most of their titles is you should feel like you're looking at this through a lens, right? So you will see raindrops on the actual lens, or dirt on the lens, and you'll see bouquet and bloom and racked focus and all of these things where it looks like a cinematographer is doing this experience. They create some pretty complex systems. They kind of recreate a real camera and all the settings of a real camera in order to get things to bloom and get lens flares and all of that. Same thing with weather. They create these systems that are like dynamic weather systems. And so we wanted to get across something similar, but we're not going to create a camera. It's expensive from a labor standpoint, but it's also, expensive from a performance standpoint. So we would just hone in on like, what are some of the things that a real camera gives you? Lens dirt is one example, and they have dynamic lens dirt, and right, if a grenade goes off next to you in the mud, this mud splatters on the screen. It's pretty awesome. We just do like old school lens dirt that we can kind of dial up and dial down during the match. So you kind of see a little bit more, a little less as you're running. We couldn't really do a lot of lens flares. It was, again, alpha is expensive on mobile, and so we basically leaned into lens dirt that would pick up bright areas of the screen, just as a pure post-process effect. And the lens dirt layer would be illuminated on anything bright, kind of like the window behind you, right? Like we could get that effect just by overlaying that on lens dirt. So there was a bunch of these kind of old school tricks. Same with the environment destruction. It was all vertex animated textures. So it was all canned, but it was all the animation of each vertex is just stored in one texture. So it's really low memory impact. I think everything I just brought up was created by Greg Yepes, who was our technical art director. So a shout out to him because he's a super brilliant guy.
Yay. What do you feel like were more expensive mistakes? And now if you were doing Battlefield again, you won't invest money or time in them.
When we started out, we wanted to be very different than HD Battlefield. And we had a different control scheme, and then we got dual sticks, but we still wanted it to be different. Speaking to what you're talking about, legibility on the iPhone, we're thinking, okay, these characters in Battlefield, they have very realistic proportions, and do we need to exaggerate things so that you can see them on the iPhone? Do we need to exaggerate things so you want to spend money and buy a version of these characters? So we didn't use characters from Battlefield. We created all our characters from scratch. We created the animation system from scratch. We created everything from scratch.
Wow. Somebody went on a splurge.
And so, because we did want things to look and feel different. Fortnite was actually successful when we started, and they had they're not trying to look real. And it reads really well on mobile.
I actually just remembered in my head when you and me were talking about concept work on Battlefield, and I remember the first concept were very stylized. I feel like that was like my imprint of how the characters look like. I literally have it in my head right now.
Yeah, that is where we wanted to go originally, but again, if we look at market research and you look at the top grossing mobile FPSs like PUBG or Call of Duty Mobile, they have very realistic proportions, but you do need to add some wackiness and some whimsy and some exaggeration, but you don't need to do that in the proportions. You do that in the costume design. And that seems to be enough for the mobile players. So we could have saved a lot of work by just using existing assets and animations from Battlefield.
Yeah, but on the other hand, you said that optimization of the assets from Call of Duty stuff was also a big pain. So I'm like, what is a bigger pain, I guess?
Yeah, no, that is very true. I think the animation and combat system, if we could have just brought that over, we didn't need to reinvent the wheel, basically. And maybe not just, you can't bring it over. We were in Unreal and they're in Frostbite. But we could at least look at their system and just kind of copy it.
So the first version of Battlefield Mobile was very different from what you guys released?
Yeah, so I mean, these were all just early prototypes, and it was, what if there was a very, very casual version of a shooter? What's a good example? Clash Royale is the super simplified version of tower defense, right? That anyone can play this with limited number of inputs. It comes down to that, right? Like we talked about my son playing it. He can have super dexterity with a ton of inputs every second. And the more casual you go, generally it's fewer inputs per second or per number of seconds. And you don't need that much dexterity.
How much art direction influences the gameplay on mobile games?
Most of the time I'm trying to think of how art direction can support the goals of the project and speak to the specific users and resonate with them. But I have been on projects where the art team will come up with something that just looks cool and will actually turn into a game mechanic. There's some RPG games that I've worked on mobile where we actually had the characters coming out of their frames and attacking each other. And so it kind of spawned how these characters are going to behave. And I think for Transformers Legends, we added a whole parallax theme to the cards that you collect. And that just changed how the whole game was presented. So,
I mean, parallax is a big part of any, card game right now. Were you guys trendsetters on that?
I don't know. I will say I hadn't ever seen it before I came up with that. But so yeah, Transformers Legends, I hadn't seen parallax anywhere on a mobile game. And then I think in 3D Studio Max, I put a little prototype together where I just layered the assets and then had the camera animation. And then an engineer was like, oh, that looks so cool, and did support for it overnight on his own. So the next day we were like showing people this. And now you see it everywhere. So I don't want to say I invented it, but I definitely hadn't seen it before I did it.
If you can give me like a 1-minute elevator pitch on both Battlefield Mobile and Warzone Mobile, or what makes them cool?
Yeah, so the goal with these games is to bring a way bigger audience and introduce them to the brand. Battlefield had, I think, at the time, around 30 million players. And when you do mobile games, you want to get 500 million people to download your game. So it's just a completely different scale. And so, I mean, the pitch for me, the reason why I was excited to work on Battlefield is it is an incredible experience. It is one of the most beautiful games I've ever played because you actually feel like you're in a movie. You do feel this roller coaster of emotions. There is a ton of destruction, which is really cool. And so the idea of introducing all those great things about Battlefield to this way larger audience was really appealing to me. I learned a lot about the game and got way more into Battlefield as a franchise after working on it. It's just how do you do that and do it to a group of people that wouldn't normally look at a dark, gritty military shooter and be like, oh yeah, no, I totally want to play that. So what can you give them that has the essence of Battlefield, but still kind of ticks the boxes for their mobile sensibilities?
So why would I as a player, be excited to play it on mobile?
It's not super easy to play a console game. You have to be in the room where your console is set up, and you have to have a chunk of time. So any experience, and that's what mobile's been trying to do forever, is just what experience are you just getting day to day, and how can we just put that in your pocket so you have access to that? And that's not just gaming, right? That's finance and communication and everything.
And if I'm one of those 470 rest of the millions that haven't played it, and I'm introduced to Battlefield on mobile, why would I be excited to play Battlefield?
I don't know if you would be, because you do have to like shooters, right? So my wife is not going to want to play it no matter how beautiful it is and how amazing it is. But
well, let's imagine I am a shooter player. Why Battlefield?
I'm going to imagine you're a shooter. And I think for Battlefield, what you get, whether it's on mobile or on PC, is really just that cinematic experience. And for us, for the mobile version, it was destruction. It was really the only title that had that level of destruction, where you could hop in a tank and drive through this plaza and just blow through everything, buildings and kiosks, and drive over cars and everything. And it's really satisfying to do that. Again, as humans, I don't know why, but getting in a virtual tank and driving over houses is always fun.
When I'm in the end of my work day, I would love to destroy some stuff. Like, please. I actually had an experience like that. It's very, very, very satisfying in a real world. And what about Call of Duty?
Warzone is leaning more into the cross-platform play. So, and it's a live service product from the beginning, both on HD, on console, and on mobile. And so a lot of that experience is about collecting and leveling up your stuff, right? And just acquiring these things that you want to acquire, whether it's a weapon or a character. And you put in so much time on the console that when you're not around the console, it's nice to be able to bring out your mobile device and continue that progression and still be acquiring stuff and having the same amount of fun that you had on console, but now you can do it anywhere. So, and like you said, I think that's what a lot of people are looking at, is this whole cross-platform, cross-progression, shared economy systems. It's obviously good for the developers because you get more eyes on your product for a longer period of time. I think it's good for the player. Like, if I have an experience I love, I'd love to be able to access that whenever I want.
Something that you said a little earlier, right? Let's say the Battlefield audience before launching the mobile version was like 30 million, and kind of your goal would be, as any developer bringing on mobile, is like 500 million or 100 million or whatever that number is. But how do you deal with that? The audiences historically are so different. Like you were telling a little earlier about your son, and the gameplay is like the way they play with controls is completely different. Like, how do you develop a product acknowledging that those audiences are so different?
Yeah, I mean, you're trying to find the overlap, the similarities. And so I'll just speak just from the art director part of it. It really was scouring what the brand has to offer from an artistic point of view and picking out what we think will work on mobile. There's plenty of bright, saturated levels in Call of Duty and Battlefield and any console game. Maybe not any console game, but most console games. And that's just one example, right? We're talking about palette, but it really is just, especially those brands, Battlefield and Call of Duty, have been around for a long time. So there is a lot to look at and a lot to choose from. And you just find what you think will work for mobile audience sensibilities. And try to stay away from stuff that you think will scare them away.
Well, you definitely have so much experience in, like, you also shared that you've studied so much with Battlefield, and obviously the Call of Duty had to play a lot of it. It probably look into it from more of like historical perspective of how they looked like in, early 2000s and till now. What's your overview of how they were versus how they're right now, and how they're probably going to change? And
I think you nailed it. It's changing, and it's changing because everyone's going to the live service model. And I think more and more people are realizing what we just talked about, that there's certain types of maps and color palettes and activities and emotions that that people want to have if they're going to come back every day for years. That I failed to mention this whole time, but it's really the thing that drives me the most on most of the decisions is the emotion of the player, what you want them to feel at any given moment. And so there's a feel, and I think you have to get the team aligned on this. When a player lands on your main menu, do you want them to feel excited? Do you want them to feel relaxed? Right? There's a certain number of emotions that you definitely do want them to feel, and there's certain ones that you want them to avoid because, right, you want them to come back. But Candy Crush, you brought that up earlier. How is that still up there? Candy Crush is like the biggest stress reliever when you get onto their main menu, because it's just that chill, happy music and happy candy. And it's, if you're stressed, where would you rather go than the Candy Crush main page? It's so relaxed. But if you're in the store, do you want people to be relaxed, or do you want to have a little, and this is with music and visuals and everything. Do you want them to feel a little bit more stimulated so that they want to actually like click in? What is this character about? Oh, what is this weapon about? Let me spin it around. Oh, that's cool. Look at the glint on that. Okay, maybe I'm going to spend my virtual currency on it. So I think when thinking about the front end or moment to moment, not just artists, but the entire team has to think about, what do I want this person to be feeling in this moment? And then everything should support it, from art and gameplay features and music and everything.
I'm just imagining a very chill, relaxed first-person shooter. When you come in a main menu, or you want them to feel geared up before they come in a battle, we probably want to have them feel geared up before they go into their first match.
It's a great question, right? That's a great conversation. What do you want them to feel? They've just been playing this game where everyone's shooting at them, right? And they've been hyper-focused for 5 to 10 to 15 minutes. Maybe you want to give them a break, right? In the main menu. Like, I'm going to give some breathing time. And that was hard. But you know what? I got this little breather. I'm ready to jump into another match. So, I mean, yeah, a lot of games do that, where they give you that little break. So it really is this pacing of emotions that you have to be aware of.
Love it. Definitely want to have a break if I'm playing a first-person shooter after being chased and I just survived. You definitely have been exposed to both sides of PC, console, mobile. I'm not sure where the new adventure brings you, but I was wondering, what are the trends that you're seeing that might be influencing the next 2-3 years of game development, and what should we lean into?
A couple things I'm very excited about. One is just because it's clear that the industry is going this way. The other is just because I love it. So the first is user-generated content. And that could be in Roblox or in Fortnite, but just giving the masses the ability to create stuff and have players engage with it and monetize on it. I think that's going to be huge. It's going to spawn a whole ecosystem that we probably don't even understand what's possible yet, with brand partners and all kinds of stuff that, again, like when the phone came out, we just didn't know what it was going to be capable of. And I think with user-generated content, we've just scratched the surface, and people are going to come up with some cool stuff that we can't even imagine right now on how to use those platforms. And the other thing is VR and MR, and that's just me personally. I just love that platform. I don't like the hardware. It's uncomfortable.
I mean, we came very far from like when 2016 everyone was like, oh my god, VR is the next thing, and then really wasn't. And I feel like it's finally like, okay, people are excited. There's a Batman Arkham that just came out from Camouflage, and like the industry is raging. There's Behemoth coming from Skydance. There's like a lot happening in that space. Like I saw one of the comments on Behemoth was like, well, this game from a design perspective sounds more exciting than anything that's coming up on the PC and console market. And I don't think I've ever heard anyone saying something like that about any VR game.
My favorite experience ever, or maybe my top 2 ever, have both been in VR. And one was with the Oculus Quest 2, and it's the Star Wars game where you're in the dojo and you feel like an actual Jedi. I played Fallen Order as well, which was it's an amazing game. But it just doesn't feel as real as being in there and wielding a lightsaber and crushing people with the Force and all that. That's so awesome. And then the other one was when they had those actual the brick and mortar stores that you go to and you put on the whole VR thing and you walk through real rooms. I did a Star Wars one there, and it was incredible. There's a 7-foot tall Darth Vader walking at you, and it's just it's so amazing. But yeah, hardware still has a ways to go, right? It's still uncomfortable, it's still sweaty and all that. But I think it's not too long until you're going to have something that's pretty comfortable, and you're going to be interacting with stuff in your living room and backyard, and I can't wait. It's awesome.
Steve, I feel like I've learned so much. I'm on the verge of going and starting my own first-person mobile shooter game. That's probably going to cost me a gajillion amount of money. But I feel like I feel very equipped after our conversation that I could do it. And if I ever need an advice, I'm definitely going to call you because you're the biggest expert in that space. So thank you so much for coming in and sharing your wisdom. And I can't wait to see what's next for you.
Well, thanks for the time. This was a lot of fun. I love talking about the type of stuff and studying it and learning about it. And it changes month to month. So this was great. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you.